The rain that night wasn't just falling, it was pouring as if the sky itself was crying. The streets were nearly empty, washed in silver from the streetlights, and the only sound breaking the quiet was the low, thunderous roar of motorcycle engines cutting through the storm. A group of 6 bikers rode side by side, their leather jackets glistening with raindrops, headlights slicing through the darkness like blades of light. They weren't the kind of men people messed with. They looked rough, wild, powerful, but underneath those tough exteriors, there were hearts that had seen pain, loss, and injustice. Their leader, Jake, rode in front, tall, scarred, with eyes that had seen too much of life. He loved the open road. To him, riding through the rain felt like freedom, like washing away the sins of yesterday. But even that night, something felt different. The storm wasn't ordinary. It carried a strange chill, a strange whisper, like the world was warning him that something was about to happen. And then it did. Out of nowhere, a small figure appeared ahead, running into the middle of the road, waving tiny arms in panic. Jake slammed his brakes. Tires screeched. Water splashed. The roar of 6 engines went silent in unison. "Whoa, whoa!" shouted one of the bikers behind him. What the hell? Jake jumped off his bike before the others could even react. The figure was so small, so fragile, it didn't make sense at first. But when his headlight shone directly on her, the sight froze every man in place. It was a little girl, barefoot, soaked from head to toe and crying so hard she could barely speak. Her brown skin glistened in the rain, her tiny hands trembling as she tried to wipe her tears. Her clothes were old and torn. Maybe her school uniform, maybe just what she had. But her eyes, those eyes, were full of terror. Jake knelt down slowly. Hey, it's okay," he said in a deep, calm voice. "What's going on, kid?" She shook her head, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Please help," she cried out, her voice cutting through the storm. Jake frowned. "Help with what?" "Are you hurt?" The girl looked up at him with wide, trembling eyes. "The billionaire," she stammered, struggling to form the words through tears. "The billionaire is beating my mama." Every biker froze. The sound of the rain suddenly seemed louder, hitting their jackets, helmets, and the wet ground around them. Jake blinked in disbelief. "What did you just say?" "The billionaire!" she shouted again. "He's hurting my mama. She works in his big house. She cleans for him every day. But he got mad. He's hitting her." "Please help my mama!" Her words broke like glass against the silence. The men exchanged glances, confusion turning into anger, anger turning into purpose. Jake looked at her again, trying to understand. "You mean your mama's inside the mansion right now?" She nodded quickly, shivering. "Yes, he locked the doors. I ran out through the back gate. I tried to call for help, but nobody listened. Please, he's rich. Nobody will stop him." Jake's face hardened. That one line, "nobody will stop him," burned in his chest like fire. He knew exactly what that meant. He'd seen men like that before, men who thought power and money made them untouchable. He stood up slowly and turned toward his crew. "Mount up," he said quietly. "Boss, you sure about this?" one asked. Jake didn't even hesitate. "A man's money doesn't make him right. If he's raising his hand against a woman, especially a working mother, we stop it. Tonight." He turned back to the little girl, crouching so his eyes met hers. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Ava," she whispered. Jake nodded. "All right, Ava, you're safe now. You show us where your mama is, okay?" She sniffled, wiping her tears. "Will you really help her?" Jake gave a small, firm smile. "You have my word." He pulled off his leather jacket and draped it over her tiny shoulders to keep her warm. Then he took his helmet off and placed it on his bike. The thunder cracked above them as the engines came alive again, roaring like an army of justice. The girl sat behind Jake, holding onto him tightly as he revved the engine. "Hold on, Ava," he said. "We're going to bring your mama home." The others followed, their headlights cutting through the heavy rain, their hearts pounding with rage and determination. As they sped down the street, the storm grew fiercer, but it didn't matter. Each drop of rain felt like a warning from heaven, but also like a blessing. And for that one moment, Jake knew this wasn't just another night ride. This was something bigger. This was a fight for someone's mother, a fight for justice, a fight to remind the world that sometimes heroes don't wear suits. They ride motorcycles through the rain. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, inside a mansion on the hill, a poor janitor was praying for help, not knowing that an army was already on the way. Rainwater dripped from the edges of Jake's leather jacket as his motorcycle engine growled low in the darkness. The little girl Ava sat behind him, holding onto his waist with trembling hands. Her tiny fingers gripped tight, and every time thunder rolled across the sky she flinched, but she didn't cry anymore. The road ahead was long, winding and almost empty. Street lights flickered on and off, their glow bouncing off puddles like ghosts dancing in the night. The other bikers followed close behind, their headlights shining like a convoy of hope cutting through despair. Jake spoke just loud enough for her to hear over the wind. "You're doing great, kid. We're gonna get there soon. Don't be scared." Ava sniffled softly. "I'm not scared anymore." "You came." Those 3 words hit Jake deep. He didn't respond right away, just pressed the throttle a little harder. He wasn't used to being called a hero. He'd spent most of his life running from trouble, not riding into it. But tonight felt different. Tonight he wasn't just a biker. He was a protector. After a few minutes he slowed the bike and turned down a narrow, almost hidden road that Ava pointed to. Trees lined both sides, their branches bending under the rain like they were bowing to the storm. "That way," Ava said, her voice quivering. "His house is on top of that hill." Jake glanced in the rearview mirror. His men were close, alert, silent. Each one of them felt it too. Something dark waited ahead. As they rode, Jake asked, "So your mama works for this man, the billionaire?" Ava nodded against his back. "Yes, Mr. Wallace. Everyone says he's the richest man around here. He owns buildings, cars, everything." Jake frowned. "And what does your mama do?" "She cleans," Ava said softly. "Every morning she leaves before I wake up. She says rich people like their houses shining like mirrors." Jake's chest tightened. "How long's she worked there?" "Almost 2 years," Ava said. She said he used to be nice. He would smile at me sometimes when Mama brought me along. He gave me a cookie once. Her voice cracked a little. But then something changed. "What changed?" Jake asked, glancing at her in the mirror. He started shouting, throwing things. He got mad all the time. Mama said maybe he's just sad or lonely. But tonight, her voice broke and the rest came out in a whisper. Tonight he broke one of his glass things and Mama said sorry, but he grabbed her. Jake's hands tightened around the handlebars. "He what?" "She told me to hide in the kitchen, but I heard him yelling. I heard her crying. I ran out the back door. He didn't see me. I ran and ran until I saw your lights." Jake swallowed hard. Anger flared inside him in hot, sharp and silent. "You did the right thing, Ava," he said finally. "You were brave. You ran for help. You did exactly what a hero does." Ava's small voice trembled. "But I'm just a kid." Jake looked ahead at the road disappearing into darkness. "Sometimes, kid, it takes the smallest voices to stop the biggest monsters." The bikers rode in silence for a while, the rain beating against their helmets. Lightning flashed across the sky, revealing a glimpse of something massive in the distance. A hill, and on top of it, a sprawling mansion with tall iron gates and white marble walls. Even from far away it looked powerful, cold and untouchable. Ava pointed toward it with a shaking hand. "That's his house." Jake slowed down, parking near a row of trees at the edge of the road. His crew gathered around him, water dripping from their jackets. "That's the place," he said quietly. "No guards outside. Probably cameras, though. Big money always has eyes." One of his men, Rico, spat on the ground. "What kind of man hits a woman, huh?" "A coward, that's what?" Another biker muttered. "Boss, we're about to walk into a billionaire's house. You sure about this?" Jake's eyes hardened. "I've been sure since that little girl ran in front of my bike." He turned to Ava again. "Stay with us, but when we get close, you stay behind me. Understand?" Ava nodded, her small face streaked with rain and fear. "I just want Mama." Jake crouched in front of her, lowering his voice. "You're going to see her soon. I promise. But you have to be strong. No matter what you see, you don't scream, you don't run. You trust me. Deal?" Ava hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. "Deal." He gave her a faint smile, the kind only a man who's seen too much pain can give. "That's my girl." He turned to his crew and gestured toward the mansion. "We move now. Quiet. Fast." The bikers fanned out, engines turned off, boots splashing through puddles as they walked through the rain-soaked ground. Ava followed close behind Jake, her small hand gripping his leather vest. As they drew closer, the mansion loomed larger, its tall iron gates, its polished marble walls, the faint golden light shining through the curtains. Everything about it screamed power, but behind those bright lights, behind those thick walls, somewhere inside, a woman was crying for help. And tonight, a little girl's courage had brought an army to her door. Jake took one final look at the mansion, his jaw set. "Let's finish this," he whispered, and as thunder cracked above them, they stepped into the shadows, where justice waited to be served. The road ended at the top of a lonely hill, and there it stood, the Wallace Mansion, a massive structure of cold marble and glass, glowing faintly under the lightning-split sky. Its tall iron gates looked more like the entrance to a fortress than a home. The walls stretched wide, the hedges perfectly trimmed, the driveway glistening with rainwater that shimmered like black glass. Every inch of it screamed wealth, power, and distance. Ava's small voice broke the silence. "That's his house." Jake stared up at it, water dripping from his jaw. "Figures," he muttered. "Biggest house in town. Smallest heart inside." The other bikers dismounted, the crunch of their boots mixing with the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. Their reflections shimmered in puddles of rain, forming a ghostly image. 6 men in black leather, standing against a mansion built from greed. Ava clung to Jake's leg, her eyes wide. "Mama's inside," she whispered. "I saw the lights on in the big room." Jake crouched down to her level, his voice calm but firm. "Stay behind me, all right? Don't move until I tell you. You're safe now." She nodded, her little face pale and scared. Jake stood tall again, his muscles tense. He scanned the walls, noticed a few blinking red dots and security cameras. "Money buys walls, but it can't buy honor," he muttered. Then to his crew, "We're going in quiet. Nobody hurts anyone unless they have to. We're here to protect, not destroy." "Got it, boss," Rico said, pulling his hood up. They split up, moving along the sides of the gate. Rainwater streamed down the iron bars like tears. Jake wrapped his hands around the metal, tested it. It was strong, but not stronger than his will. He stepped back, gave a nod to the man beside him, and with one powerful kick the lock snapped open. The gate swung apart with a deep metallic groan. Ava flinched. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's okay. It's just a door, kid. Now let's open the right one." They walked up the long stone path leading to the mansion's front doors. The closer they got, the more oppressive the silence became. Heavy, suffocating. Only the sound of rain hitting the grand windows broke the stillness. Jake's eyes moved toward the large front window. He saw movement, a shadow pacing back and forth. Then lightning flashed, and in that flash the scene came into horrifying focus. A woman, Ava's mother, Mrs. Daniels, was on her knees, clutching a broken vase. Her face was wet, from tears or rain, Jake couldn't tell. Towering over her was Mr. Wallace, the billionaire himself. Tall, well-dressed, and red with rage. He pointed a finger at her, shouting words that couldn't be heard through the glass. But his expression said everything. Fury, disgust, and entitlement. Then his arm swung. Ava gasped. He's hurting her." That was all Jake needed to hear. Without another word, he rushed forward. His boots slammed against the marble steps. His hand grabbed the heavy front door handle. Locked. "Rico!" he shouted. Rico stepped up with a steel bar from his bike, jammed it into the gap, and with one mighty pull, the lock snapped. The door burst open, crashing into the wall. The sound echoed like thunder through the mansion's grand halls. Mr. Wallace spun around, startled, his eyes wide. The bikers filled the doorway, soaked, furious, and uninvited. Jake's voice boomed across the marble floor. "Step away from her now." Mrs. Daniels looked up, trembling, confused. Who are you people?" Jake's eyes softened for her. "The people your daughter ran through the storm to find." Mr. Wallace's face twisted with anger. "What is this nonsense? You have no right—" Jake cut him off, stepping forward. "No right? You're beating a woman who cleans your house for pennies. And you think we have no right?" Wallace's jaw tightened. "She broke my antique vase." "It's worth more than—" Jake snapped, his voice sharp as thunder. "More than her life? More than her dignity? You think being rich makes you better than her?" For a second, silence filled the air. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Ava ran to her mother, throwing her arms around her. "Mama, I'm here." Mrs. Daniels clutched her daughter tightly, sobbing. "Ava, no! You shouldn't have come here." Jake turned to them. "She did the bravest thing I've seen all year." Then to Wallace, "You should thank her, because she might have just saved you from doing something unforgivable." The billionaire's pride flared again. "You think you can threaten me? Do you know who I am?" Jake stepped closer, his boots echoing across the floor. "Yeah," he said quietly, his voice steady and deadly calm. "I know exactly who you are. You're the kind of man who thinks his money gives him permission to hurt the people who need him most." Wallace opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The bikers stood behind, Jake like a wall of strength. Ava hid her face in her mother's arms, and for the first time in a long, long time, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar: fear. Jake's final words broke the silence like a blade. "Now you're going to step away from that woman, and you're going to remember that money can't buy mercy." The mansion was silent, except for the distant rumble of thunder and the soft sobs of Ava's mother. The air inside felt heavy, charged, like a storm waiting to explode again. Rain streamed down the tall glass windows, the shadows shifting across the marble floor. The bikers stood firm, soaked and unshaken, while Mr. Wallace straightened his tie, trying to act like the master of the house again. Jake took a step forward, his boots echoing against the floor. "You lay a hand on her again," he said, his voice calm but dangerous, "and I promise you'll regret it for the rest of your life." Mr. Wallace's eyes narrowed. "You think you can come into my house, threaten me, and walk away? You don't know who you're dealing with." Jake tilted his head unfazed. "I don't need to know who you are. I can already see what you are." The words hit harder than a punch. Mr. Wallace's face flushed red. "This woman, this janitor, has no respect. She broke my property and she—" Jake's voice cut through him like thunder. "How you broke her spirit long before she broke your vase." Silence. The rain outside grew louder, as if the heavens themselves were listening. Mrs. Daniels trembled, holding Ava close. "Please, sir," she whispered to Jake, her voice weak. "Don't make things worse. He'll fire me. Jake turned to her gently. "Ma'am, there's nothing worse than letting someone think they own your life." He looked back at the billionaire. "You're lucky we got here when we did. That little girl out there ran through the rain crying, begging for help. Do you have any idea what that means? She's a child, and she was terrified of what you might do to her mother." Mr. Wallace's lips trembled. "She had no right to bring strangers—" Jake took another step forward, his voice deepening. "She had every right, because when the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones who hurt you, the world has to step in." Wallace clenched his fists, but he didn't move. He could feel the weight of Jake's words. Behind Jake, the bikers spread out, not threatening but watchful. "They weren't here to fight. They were here to stand for something," Rico muttered under his breath. "Man's got all this gold and not a single piece of heart." Jake ignored him, keeping his eyes locked on Wallace. "Let me guess," he said slowly. "You built your empire, didn't you? You tell everyone you worked your way up, that you earned it all." Wallace straightened a little, pride flashing again. "That's right. I built everything here with my own hands and mind. I earned every penny," Jake nodded. "Then tell me this. When did you start thinking other people stopped mattering?" The question landed like a stone dropped in still water, quiet but impossible to ignore. Wallace's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. These people, Jake interrupted sharply. "Clean your floors, wash your sheets, make your coffee. They see the side of your life you hide from everyone else. And you think that gives you power over them." Mrs. Daniels wiped her tears, whispering, "He said I was lucky to work here. That people like me should be grateful." Jake's face darkened. "Grateful for what?" "For being treated like less than human." Ava hugged her mother tighter, crying softly. "Mama, can we go home, please?" That tiny, trembling voice broke something inside the room, and inside the billionaire. For the first time, Mr. Wallace's mask slipped. The arrogance, the anger, it cracked. He looked at the little girl clutching her mother, afraid of him. He saw not a servant and her child, but two human beings trembling in his mansion of wealth. Jake saw it too. "You see that?" he said quietly. "That's fear, not of poverty, not of hunger, but of you." The billionaire swallowed hard but said nothing. His eyes darted to Mrs. Daniels, her torn sleeve. The red mark on her arm, the broken vase beside her feet. Guilt, real, raw guilt, began to take root where pride once stood. Jake stepped closer, his tone softening just a little. You think money makes you untouchable. But it doesn't, because there's one thing money can't buy, and respect. You have to earn that, just like you claim you earned everything else. Mr. Wallace turned away, his reflection trembling in the rain-covered window. His voice dropped. I didn't mean to. It just got out of hand. I was angry. Jake nodded. Anger doesn't justify cruelty. You can fix a vase, Wallace, but you can't fix a child's fear, not easily. A long silence filled the room. Finally, Mr. Wallace took a step back, his hands shaking. I didn't realize what I'd become. Jake studied him quietly, then said, Then maybe tonight's the night you start realizing. He turned to Mrs. Daniels and Ava. You don't owe him anything. You walk out that door with your head high and don't ever look back. Wallace didn't stop them. He just stood there, frozen, humbled, defeated by truth. As Mrs. Daniels walked past, she paused and whispered, Thank you. Jake nodded once. Don't thank me, ma'am. Thank your daughter. She had the courage to speak when the world would have stayed silent. And with that, the thunder outside rolled again, but this time it didn't sound like danger. It sounded like freedom. For a long, breathless moment, the mansion stood in silence. The storm outside began to fade, but inside those marble walls, another storm was just beginning, one made of guilt, truth, and long overdue reflection. Mr. Wallace stood motionless in the grand hall, his breath uneven. The rain had slowed to a whisper against the windows, each drop echoing in the stillness. The bikers waited quietly, watching him, unsure if he'd explode again or finally break down. Mrs. Daniels stood by the door, holding Ava's small hand tightly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were stronger now. She had spent years enduring humiliation quietly, afraid that speaking up would cost her everything. But tonight, something had changed. Her daughter's courage had broken chains she didn't even know were still there. Ava looked up at her mother. Mama, can we go home now? Mrs. Daniels knelt, brushing a tear from her cheek. Yes, baby. We're going home. Jake turned toward the door, motioning to his crew. Let's get them out of here. But before they could leave, a faint voice broke the silence. Wait. They all turned. Mr. Wallace stood by the shattered remains of his antique vase, the same vase that had sparked his rage. He stared at the shards scattered across the floor, their once beautiful design reduced to broken pieces. His voice was quieter now. Do you know what this was? Jake looked at him unimpressed. Her piece of glass you valued more than a human being. Wallace winced. It was my wife's. That stopped everyone, he continued, voice trembling slightly. She passed away 10 years ago. It was the last thing she bought before she died. I kept it as a reminder. And when it broke, something inside me snapped. Jake's face softened slightly, but not enough to let the man off the hook. Pain doesn't give you permission to create more pain. Mr. Wallace nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. You're right. I lost myself. I spent years building this empire, hiding from the emptiness inside. I thought money controlled power. They'd protect me from feeling weak again. He looked at Mrs. Daniels, the woman he'd shouted at, belittled and struck. But I turned into the very thing my wife used to hate, cold, unkind, arrogant. Mrs. Daniels said nothing. She just held Ava closer, unsure whether to believe his sudden regret. Jake crossed his arms. You can't undo what's done, but you can decide who you'll be after tonight. Wallace lowered his gaze. I never meant to hurt her. I swear I didn't. I just forgot how to care. About anyone. Ava looked at him shyly, her small voice trembling. You scared my mama. And me too. That hit harder than any insult. Wallace's chest tightened, his throat burning with shame. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I'm sorry, little one, he whispered. I'm so sorry. Jake watched silently. He'd seen tough men break before, soldiers, bikers, fathers, but this was different. This was a man realizing that his wealth had made him poor in the ways that truly mattered. The thunder rumbled faintly outside, echoing like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Mrs. Daniels finally spoke, her voice steady but full of pain. Mr. Wallace, I worked for you 5 years. Every day I saw the picture of your wife in the hallway. I used to pray that someone looked at me the way you looked at her. But somewhere along the way you forgot how to see people. You just saw what they could do for you. Her words weren't bitter, they were honest. And that honesty was harder to face than anger. Wallace lifted his head, eyes wet. You're right. All these years I've been surrounded by things, not people. I lost my humanity chasing comfort. He took a deep breath and said something no one expected. Mrs. Daniels, you're free to leave. I'll make sure you and your daughter are safe. You'll get your full pay and something more. Jake raised an eyebrow. Money won't fix what you broke tonight. Wallace nodded. I know. But maybe it can help her start again and somewhere better. Mrs. Daniels hesitated, searching his face for sincerity, and for the first time she saw something real. Remorse. Not the kind spoken for show, but the kind that comes from finally seeing the damage you've done. She whispered softly. What changed your heart? Wallace looked at Ava. A child's truth. Sometimes it takes the smallest voice to make the loudest noise inside you. Ava blinked, not fully understanding, but sensing that something had shifted. Jake put a hand on Wallace's shoulder. I've got a long way to go to make it right. But maybe this is your first step. Wallace nodded weakly. Maybe it is. He turned toward Mrs. Daniels again. I'll make a public apology. To you and every worker I've disrespected. I don't know if I can fix what I've done, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying. Jake gave a faint smile. That's a start. As the rain eased, the clouds began to part. The first streak of dawn broke through the window, soft, golden, and forgiving. Ava squeezed her mother's hand and whispered, Mama. The rain stopped. Mrs. Daniels smiled faintly. Yes, baby. It finally did. And in that moment, inside a house built from pride and pain, something new began to bloom. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. And that's where healing always begins. The next morning, the world outside the Wallace mansion looked completely different. The storm had passed. The grass glistened with dew, and sunlight poured gently through the tall windows, washing away the shadows that had haunted the night before. But inside that house, a different kind of storm had calmed, the one inside Mr. Wallace's heart. He hadn't slept. The guilt sat heavy in his chest, replaying every word Jake had said, every tear Ava had cried, and every tremble in Mrs. Daniels's voice. For the first time in years, he saw himself clearly, not as the billionaire everyone respected, but as the man he had become, lonely, cold, and cruel without realizing it. He sat in his grand study, surrounded by trophies, awards, and portraits of himself, but none of it gave him peace. His wife's photo sat on his desk, smiling softly at him, the way she used to when he still had kindness in his eyes. He whispered, You wouldn't recognize me anymore, would you? And for the first time in a long time, he cried. Tears rolled down his face, silent but heavy. Not for the broken vase, not even for his pride, but for the years he had lost chasing power and forgetting people. By noon, he made a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone who worked for him. That afternoon, the town buzzed with something unexpected, an invitation. Mr. Wallace had called for a special employee meeting at the city's community hall. Every janitor, cook, gardener, and cleaner who had ever worked for his company received a personal letter asking them to come. Mrs. Daniels was among them. She was nervous, unsure what to expect. Ava held her hand as they walked inside. Jake and his biker crew stood quietly in the back watching. They wanted to see if the man truly meant what he'd said. The hall filled with whispers. What's going on? Why are we here? Oh, think he's firing us? Then the doors opened. Mr. Wallace walked in, not in his usual designer suit, not surrounded by bodyguards. Just a simple shirt, sleeves rolled up, no arrogance in his step. His eyes looked tired but sincere. He stood before the crowd, cleared his throat and spoke into the microphone. Last night, he began, I looked into the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. I saw wealth, yes, but I also saw emptiness. I saw the pain I caused to those who helped build my success. The hall fell silent. He continued, his voice steady but emotional. For years I thought money gave me power, but it only made me forget the people who deserved my respect the most. One of them stands here today, Mrs. Daniels. Gasps echoed. Mrs. Daniels froze. Wallace looked right at her. Her loyal, hard-working woman who endured more than she should have. Last night I hurt her, not just with my words, but with my actions. And her daughter. Her brave little girl reminded me of something I'd buried long ago, humanity. Ava blinked shyly, clutching her mother's arm. Wallace turned back to the crowd. I can't erase what I did, but I can change what I do next. He took a deep breath. From this day forward, no employee under my roof will be treated as lesser. Every worker, every cleaner, every soul who helps keep my company running will be given full benefits, fair wages and respect. The crowd erupted in whispers, disbelief, surprise, hope. Wallace wasn't done. And to Mrs. Daniels, you are no longer my janitor. You are now the Director of Employee Care and Welfare. Your job is to make sure that no one in this company ever feels the way you did again. Mrs. Daniels covered her mouth in shock. Tears filled her eyes. Ava clapped her little hands, smiling proudly. Jake, standing at the back, smiled faintly. Looks like the man meant it, Rico whispered beside him. Wallace turned toward Jake and nodded slightly, a silent thank you between two men who had once stood on opposite sides of anger. Then he looked back at everyone. Sometimes we need someone brave enough to stand up and remind us who we're supposed to be. For me, that someone was a little girl who refused to let her mother suffer in silence. He knelt down slightly, smiling at Ava. Thank you, Ava. You saved more than just your mama last night. You saved me, too. The crowd stood and clapped, not for his wealth, not for his title, but for the humility they'd never seen in him before. Mrs. Daniels wiped her tears and said softly, Maybe we all can change if we just start listening. Wallace nodded. That's the truth. As the applause grew louder, Jake and his men quietly stepped outside. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting a golden light over the town square. Rico smirked. You think he'll stay good? Jake put on his sunglasses and looked at the bright sky. Maybe. But even if he doesn't, that little girl already changed the world once. That's enough. He started his bike. The engines roared to life, but this time it didn't sound like rebellion. It sounded like hope. As Mrs. Daniels and Ava walked out of the hall, the wind carried the sound of their laughter, light, free and full of new beginnings, because sometimes the richest people in the world are the ones who finally learn the value of a human heart. News travels fast, especially when it's about a man like Mr. Wallace. By the next morning, his story was everywhere. It started as whispers in small coffee shops. Then it spread across social media, people sharing photos, short clips, and posts with captions like, "The billionaire who apologized. A janitor's daughter changed everything." Proof that hearts can still change. Within 24 hours, the internet was on fire. Local reporters gathered outside the community hall, their cameras flashing, microphones ready. But this time it wasn't scandal they wanted, it was hope. For the first time in years, people were talking about kindness instead of greed. At the center of it all was Mrs. Daniels, the woman who used to walk to work before sunrise in her faded blue uniform, now walked through the same streets with her daughter. Head held high, and people greeted her with smiles and respect. Neighbors who once overlooked her now waved warmly. "Morning, Mrs. Daniels. We're proud of you." Even Ava's schoolteacher hugged her the next day. "You're a hero, sweetheart," she said, tears in her eyes. Ava giggled shyly. "I just wanted to help my mama." And in that simple sentence lay the truth that moved an entire city. Meanwhile, in his mansion, Mr. Wallace was living differently. He no longer sat at the head of long dinner tables eating alone. He started eating lunch in the employee cafeteria, shaking hands with janitors, security guards, and cooks. He listened to their stories, their struggles, their dreams. One day he asked his new director of employee care, Mrs. Daniels, to join him for a staff meeting. The workers, unsure at first, gathered around. Wallace stood up and said, "For years I looked down from this office and thought success was about being above others. But real success," he paused, looking toward Mrs. Daniels and Ava, who sat in the front row, "is when you can look people in the eye and see yourself in them." The room went silent. Then, one by one, the workers started to clap, not for the speech, but for the change they could see was real. Soon after, Wallace launched a new initiative called the Humanity Project. It provided education funds for the children of his workers, free health care for janitorial staff, and a hotline for employee rights and welfare. And on the program's official website, there was a quote written in golden letters, "Kindness doesn't cost wealth, it creates it." And below it, a photo of Ava holding her mother's hand. That image went viral. Thousands shared it with hashtags like Charm the Humanity Project and Be Like Ava. Jake and his biker crew saw it too. They laughed when they saw themselves mentioned in a few news clips as mysterious heroes on motorcycles. Rico smirked. "Guess we're famous now." Jake shook his head with a grin. "Nah, the real hero's that kid. We just gave her story wheels." Weeks passed, and life began to bloom again in the city. People at Wallace's company noticed something new: empathy. Supervisors spoke kindly, employees smiled more, and everyone seemed to realize that compassion wasn't weakness, it was strength. One elderly janitor told Mrs. Daniels one day, "Child, I've been working here 20 years. Never once did anyone ask me how my day was. Until now." "You did that." Mrs. Daniels smiled humbly. "We all did." Ava's laugh filled the halls when she visited the office after school. She ran through the corridors, waving at people, and everyone waved back. But what touched people the most was Mr. Wallace's public interview that aired 2 months later. He sat in front of the camera, no script, no rehearsed answers, just a man finally telling the truth. "I used to believe I was powerful," he said softly. "But I learned power isn't in control, that it's in compassion. I was blind to the pain of others, until a little girl's courage opened my eyes. Her mother didn't just forgive me. She gave me a chance to be better." He paused, his eyes moist. "And to anyone watching, if you've lost your way, find it in kindness. You can't buy redemption, but you can earn it, one apology at a time." When the interview ended, social media flooded with comments like, "This changed me. I'm calling my mom right now." The world needs more stories like this. The video hit 10 million views in just a few days. Back in their small apartment, Mrs. Daniels turned off the TV. Ava sat beside her, eyes glowing. "Mama, he's good now, right?" Mrs. Daniels smiled, brushing her daughter's curls. "He's learning, baby. And sometimes learning is the hardest part." Ava grinned. "I'm happy we helped." "You did," her mother whispered. "You helped more people than you'll ever know." Outside, a soft breeze swept through the open window. The same town that once ignored a janitor now celebrated her name, and the name of her brave little girl. Because one act of courage, one tear-filled night, and one tiny voice had started a ripple that turned into a wave. And from that wave, a whole community learned something simple, yet powerful. Real change doesn't start with money. It starts with empathy. The sun was setting over the small town, painting the sky in gold and crimson. The streets glowed with the warmth of evening light, and a soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the air. It had been 6 months since that stormy night, the night that changed everything. Ava was now back in school, her laughter echoing through the playground. Her mother, Mrs. Daniels, stood a few feet away, watching her daughter swing high into the sky. Her heart felt lighter, freer. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving. She was living. Her new job as the Director of Employee Care wasn't about money or position. It was about purpose. She walked through the company halls with confidence, knowing her voice mattered now. People listened. People smiled when she passed. She had become the very change she once prayed for. And every time she looked at Ava, she remembered. It all began with courage. That evening, as the sun dipped lower, Mrs. Daniels received an unexpected message. It was from Mr. Wallace himself. "Would you and Ava come to the community center tomorrow? There's something I'd like to show you." Mrs. Daniels hesitated for a moment, her heart fluttering with old emotions, fear, curiosity, and something she couldn't name. But deep down she knew she had to go. The next day, the community hall was alive with people. Reporters, employees, families, all gathered for what Mr. Wallace called a day of gratitude. When Mrs. Daniels and Ava arrived, the crowd parted for them like the sea. Everyone knew their story. Everyone knew that without them, this moment wouldn't exist. Mr. Wallace stood at the podium, dressed simply, no luxury watch, no expensive suit, just a man who had learned the value of humility. As the applause faded, he began to speak. 6 months ago, I was a man surrounded by wealth but empty inside, he said. And that night, a little girl's cry shattered my world and rebuilt it piece by piece. He turned toward Ava, who was standing beside her mother. Ava, you taught me something no book, no degree, and no business ever could. What it means to be human. The crowd went silent. Even the cameras stopped flashing. He continued, I wanted today to be about giving back, not as a billionaire, but as a man who was saved by compassion. He gestured toward the curtain behind him. It lifted slowly, revealing a large sign carved in wood. Gasps rippled through the hall. Mrs. Daniels covered her mouth in disbelief. Wallace smiled gently. This community center will serve every working family, free daycare, scholarships for children, and support for anyone struggling. It will stand here as a reminder that kindness can come from the most unexpected places. He turned back to Mrs. Daniels. This center carries your name, not because of what happened that night, but because of who you are. You represent strength, forgiveness, and grace. You didn't just survive pain, you turned it into purpose. Tears welled in Mrs. Daniels' eyes. She took Ava's hand, squeezing it tightly. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Wallace's eyes softened. No, thank you, for saving me. Then he knelt down in front of Ava, and thank you, brave one. You showed the world that even the smallest voice can echo loud enough to change hearts. Ava smiled shyly and asked, Does this mean we're friends now? Wallace chuckled softly, tears glimmering in his eyes. Yes, Ava, friends. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, not for the billionaire, but for the two souls who had reminded him what life was really about. As the ceremony ended, the sun poured golden light through the tall windows. Reporters swarmed the stage, but Wallace didn't speak again. He stepped back and let Mrs. Daniels and Ava stand in the spotlight. Jake and his biker crew watched from the crowd. Rico nudged him with a grin. Looks like your thunder scared a man straight. Jake smirked. No, it was her lightning that did the real work. He nodded toward Ava. They both laughed, the sound blending with applause and music. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, Mrs. Daniels walked outside with Ava. The air smelled of rain again, gentle, cleansing, peaceful. Ava tugged her mother's hand. Mama, do you think rich people can really change? Mrs. Daniels looked toward the community center, where Mr. Wallace stood watching them from the doorway, a humble smile on his face. She smiled softly. Yes, baby. I think anyone can change, if they listen to their heart. Ava grinned. Then maybe we helped him find his. Mrs. Daniels bent down, hugging her tightly. You did, my love. You did. That night, as the lights of the Daniels Center glowed across the town, something magical happened. The same storm that once brought fear had now given birth to hope. The same mansion that once echoed with cruelty now welcomed laughter and kindness. And the same little girl who once cried for help now smiled, knowing she'd changed the world simply by speaking the truth. In a world obsessed with power and pride, it was a child's voice that reminded everyone what real wealth is: compassion. Because sometimes the greatest stories aren't about the powerful who conquer others. They're about the brave who teach the powerful how to love again. And as the final light of day faded, Mrs. Daniels whispered a quiet prayer under her breath, not of pain, but of peace. Thank you for the storm, because without it we would have never seen the rainbow.